So now let's move to the final presentation for today. Miss Lee.
Okay. Hello, everyone. My name is ShaSha, and I'm the first year student at GSIS. And today I'd like to introduce a net zero emission target in China. And my presentation will contain these 4 parts: the background, motivation, multiple stakeholders, and the challenges. At first, I'd like to introduce the background. In this map, we can find that China took the largest share in global CO2 emissions in 2019. And this graph shows that we can find out the per capita carbon oxygen emissions in China is keeping increasing from the 1978 to 2017. And this graph shows the carbon emission identity of economy in China and the world. We can find the carbon emission identity is the amount of the CO2 emitted per unit of gross domestic product. It reflects the relative difference between the CO2 emissions and the GDP. For example, if a country's GDP temporarily follows, it's possible to be seen an increase in intensity, even if the CO2 emissions remain the same, because GDP has dropped relative to the CO2. So in this graph, we can see that since 1978, the China's carbon emission identity of the economy has been declined more than 50% through more effective technology adoption and improved industry practice. But the China's carbon identity is still higher than the world average level. But in the September 2020, at the United Nations General Assembly, the Chinese President Xi Jinping made a surprise announcement stating that China will achieve a peak in carbon dioxide emissions from before 2030 and carbon neutrality before 2060. It's the first time that China has acknowledged the need to reach zero carbon emissions by mid-century, and it is a true milestone in international climate policy. And according to the Tsinghua University's report, to achieve the net zero target, China has to decrease the coal 96%, natural gas 75%, oil 65%, and increase the wind at the 346%, solar at 587%. It is quite a big challenge for China to achieve net zero target, but why, under this tough background, why China insists on the net zero emissions and makes such an impossible goal? Actually, some people believe that China's announcement has driven more by the political motives rather than a genuine design to limit the impacts of climate change, because our announcement came just minutes after the President Trump and the US administration refused to address climate change as a clear and well-calculated move. So China's announcement put US into an interesting position. If the world's largest polluter can commit to decarbonization, why can't world's most developed country cannot do? So, but actually, if we review the history of the transformation of China's perception of climate change, we will understand how China developed this net zero target. In 1980s, China preferred to economic development to environment protection, though international society criticizes that China should take more responsibility to global climate issues. At that time, China was in the state of the I was asked to reduce carbon emission, but after 2012, China has entered into the state of I volunteer to reduce carbon emissions. As environmental problems has become increasing serious, China realized that traditional development model was unsustainable and reducing emissions fits its national interest. So after the 18th PC Central Committee, Chinese government developed the new concept of development. They are innovation-driven development, coordinated development, the green development, and beneficial for all development, and they're oriented towards a global progress. And in the 2020, the China's GDP based on PPP was $24,142.83 billion. At the economic level, China is becoming a middle income country. So it is a stage of economic development that China should concern more about their environment. So the net zero target is generally in the line with building ecological development. It is like a domestic development need and is an endorse driving force. In a word, China has spent more than 40 years on modernization by traditional industrialized model. Now China is looking for a green path of sustainable development. Actually, there is a hot debate about the net zero target. There were three different opinions. First is the opinion from the reformist. They argue that the net zero target requires a lot of infrastructure investments, and these investments can contribute significantly to economic growth. For example, the conversion of traditional fossil energy to renewable energy requires tens of trillions of yuan to invest. So it will promote the rapid development of renewable energy industry and accelerate China's industrial upgrading. And the second, but the conservatives argue that this goal of the net zero will put too much pressure on China's industrial development. And now in China, fossil energy accounts for nearly 85% of energy consumption. It is very difficult to replace such a large proportion of fossil energy. They worry that if China accelerates the process of net zero too quickly, it will violate the natural role of the industrial development. And at the same time, the technologists, they believe in the technological progress. They think that without changing the traditional industrialization model, only technological progress could make net zero target come true. As China has already made a lot of new technologies and created new materials, including the carbon capture technology, environmental protection technology, energy saving and emission reduction technology, and so on. As long as China increases scientific research and innovation, new technologies will solve problems and achieve net zero target. These three opinions reflect the three stakeholders. They are the economic development group, the traditional energy group, and the technology innovation group. And to achieve the net zero target, we need to, in China, should keep the electricity form. So I will introduce two groups in the electricity reform. In this table, we can see that in 1979, the management of the electricity there are three departments. There are the state planning commissions, National Energy Administration, Development and the Reform Commission, and the Ministry of Electricity. They manage the electricity issues together, and there are no clear divisions of their work. But in the 1997, the first electricity reform began. So it divided in two parts. The one part is the National Power Corporation. Its function is with the business. But for the State Development Planning Commission and the National Economic and Trade Commission, these two commissions are focused on the supervisory bodies. And to some extent, the supervisory bodies represented the reformist idea, but the business were other group from the conservatives. If we follow the structure of the Chinese central government's design, the DRC, the Development and the Reform Commission, and the SASAC, they are topper than these corporations or the national power corporations. And it seems like they had to have the stronger power than the conservatives. But actually, in fact, the conservatives could make their advantage of the business to their policy implement. For example, the national corporations could cooperate together to build higher standard of the power grid, so that the renewable energy industry cannot satisfy for now. And in the second part, the multi-stakeholders, they are between the central governments and the local governments. And the central government wants to reform more quickly to achieve their carbon neutrality. But for the local governments, they want to focus on the economic growth. I will explain it in the next part on challenges. And here are two graphs on the China's consumption and productions in annual by source. And we can find that the left one is the consumption, and the right hand is about the consumption. And we can find that in China, fossil energy accounts like for the nearly 85% of the primary energy consumption, and the coal accounting for 85%, and the proportion of the clean energy is only nearly about the 15%. And so, and at the right hand, we can find out the generation of the renewable energy is very limited. So it's for China how to balance the high consumption of the fossil fuels and the limited generations of the renewable energy is a big challenge to be solved at first. And the second is the political challenges. As I mentioned before, in the two slides before, it's a bureaucratic competition between the central departments. And the second is a policy loop. Policy loop, the typical case is the carbon trading pilot schemes. the carbon prices is the most important policy to reduce the carbon emissions. Though China has conducted the carbon trading pilot schemes in 7 provinces, but none of them have measures to in place avoid or reduce carbon leakage by enterprises in sectors. So as a result, enterprises in the pilot areas, they could shift their production capacity to non-pilot areas. And it's quite difficult for central governments to balance. And the third is about the local resistance. And the third is about the local resistance. And for the local system, we can following the electricity improvement system in 2015, the local governments gained more power in determining the power mix and the market share of various units of the power generation in a provincial area. So if let's move on the case. This is the graphs for the status and capacity of the new coal power projects by province in 2020. The data is collected from the January to the May. We can find that there are almost more than 10 provinces. They approved the coal power projects. And the second graph is for the level of the government and the capacity of the new coal power projects. Is the blue one is for the central government. So green one represents the central government plus the local government. The purple one represents the local government. We can find out in these all the new coal power projects the local governments play a very big roles in approve these projects. And different from the central government, local governments value economic development higher than the carbon emissions. So that's why local governments and the central plus the local could approve so many new coal power projects. So that's why I mentioned that the local governments could against the central government. And this slide is our survey result from the Deloitte. They conduct the survey among the Chinese enterprises. They asked about the 76 enterprises to ask their attitudes on who should take climate actions. And there are 3 kinds of the enterprises: large enterprises, medium enterprises, and the small enterprises. And as they're according to the results, these are the fields which these enterprises come from. The 37% enterprises came from the energy, resources, and industry field. And the 27% comes from the consumption field, and the 20% comes from the financial field. And I chose this report because the energy, resource, industry enterprises take their highest proportion, and it might reflect the real energy enterprises attitude to the climate change and the net zero target. And here is the result. And when we asked who should take the climate change, more than 50% the enterprises say that the national governments should take the more responsibility of the climate change, and 12% of the enterprises say that local governments should take their responsibility. So this result could reflect that the enterprises, they lack strategic support and implementation to take their climate actions. So if Chinese government want to implement their policies from top to the local governments and the local enterprises, it will be like difficulties to how to balance and their economic interest and their political interest, and there's how to promote the sustainable development. And here is another slide for about the Chinese enterprise, if they made their decarbonization targets, and just only 18% enterprise say that they have made their targets, and just 10% enterprises are making. And some enterprises like the 13% enterprises made their other targets, not their decarbonization targets. And this figure is very interesting, because about 22% enterprises would just took no actions to the climate change. So here are I think this result, these are result of the report, I think could reflect some real attitudes from the Chinese enterprises. And here, that's all my presentations. Thank you for your attention.
Thank you very much, Ms. Lee, for a nice presentation, especially the part which was about these three groups of stakeholders engaged in the debate about Chinese policy towards the net zero. I think was very interesting. Reformists, conservatives, technologists. And it looks like we have an interesting comparison with Japan. As you said, in China, the local governments are more like a conservative force of resistance, while from Ms. Otta's presentation, we saw that local governments appear to be, at least in Japan, like a major actor, if I may say, towards change.